makes an independent war against Japan. In rear areas like Yan'an, soldiers raise their food. Mao himself grows tobacco. Zhu De, the Red Army's commander-in-chief, hoes his own cabbage patch. Peasant women spin and sew the cloth for uniforms. Fashion straw sandals for the soldiers. The mind of Mao Zedong sees warfare differently from other men.
I remember Mao Zedong saying to me that Americans thought the communists would lose, that they saw the communists in the hills of Yan'an walking around with straw sandals, a ragamuffin army, and he said that any wise European who had seen George Washington's people at Valley Forge would have said that George Washington was going to lose. He said, it's true, he said, that the Japanese and Chiang Kai-shek have electricity, airplanes, tanks, and we have nothing, he said. But then he said, the British had all those things, and George Washington didn't have electricity, and yet George Washington won. You suddenly realize with a start that Mao Zedong was not really sure of when and in what century electricity was introduced. That the structure of his knowledge was totally different from the structure of Chiang Kai-shek's and ours.
Mao's knowledge of Asian war, however, is unmatchable. With these generals, he lifts the doctrine of partisan warfare to new levels. Lin Biao directs Kangda, training school for guerrilla leaders. Zhu De deploys guerrilla bands hundreds of miles in Japan's rear. The people are the sea, says Mao Zedong. Guerrillas are like fish who swim in the sea. Within a year, such troops gather 200,000 peasant soldiers. The Japanese may seize cities, but the 8th Route Army holds all North China countryside about them. In the Yangtze Valley, however, all through summer 38, fortress after fortress of Chiang Kai-shek falls. The Japanese crunch on. By October, his last 2 citadels are doomed. First Canton, then 4 days later, Hankou falls. Killing prisoners, spreading horror where they go, the Japanese convince themselves that sheer stark terror will now at last persuade the nationalists to quit. The war is won. Yet still their prey eludes them. From Hankou, Jiang has planned retreat. His government is to settle at Chongqing, in China's deepest mountain fastness, Sichuan. The nationalists set out. Pack laborers salvage from the burning cities what few machines they can. Students haul away school libraries. Beyond the mountains lies the safety of the Sichuan Basin, its only entry by the cleft the Yangtze cuts. A steeper climb, say Chinese poets, than the climb to heaven itself. Retreat continues all through winter, expression of a will to fight that no disaster has diminished. Up through these gorges, they pull or pole their boats, until finally, in 1939, the rearmost echelon of the sad procession drags through. Behind, they scorch a trackless belt of no man's land to guard these last interior strongholds from the Japanese. Chongqing is now the wartime capital, a city of another age, almost unchanged in sight or smell or sound from Manchu China. And here, among these backward peasants, the government digs in. Spurning all Japanese peace proposals, the Chinese brace themselves for certain havoc. And in the spring of '39, it comes. Day and night the bombs continue, yet Jiang persists. Powerless to strike back, Jiang knows only America can help. His diplomats in Washington seek aid. Yet he has other troubles too.
It was about this time in 1941, at the height of the bombing, that I had my first talk with Chiang Kai-shek about the war against Japan and its strategy. And at the end, almost as an afterthought, he said, "Remember, the Japanese are a disease of the skin, but the communists are a disease of the heart." It seemed odd to me because at that time the Japanese were bombing the daylights out of both Chiang Kai-shek and the communists, both of whom were allied against the Japanese. But now in retrospect, it seems to me an almost prophetic remark, almost a vision of an apocalypse to come.
Those whom the gods destroy, they first make mad. On December 7th, 1941, madness seizes the Japanese. Striking at Pearl Harbor, they hope to force America's consent to their conquest of China. Now China has a mighty ally. America's arms will soon be theirs. Geography destroys this hope. Supplies must crawl across the ocean to get to India, then be flown to China across the Japanese blockade. American pilots brave the topless Himalayas to fly the hump and carry what they can, yet average only a few thousand tons a month for the army of 4 million Chinese soldiers. Feeding an elephant with an eyedropper, an American veteran calls it. Discouraged Chinese leaders say, our arsenals make only 15 million bullets a month, just 4 per soldier. How can we fight? Americans discover there are other reasons for poor Chinese morale. Graft in their armies, generals corrupt, incompetent. The soldiers ill-shod, underfed, and sick. Major General Frank Dorn recalls his training mission at the time.
A visiting American general from Washington asked me if he could see some Chinese troops marching on the road. So we drove out, and the first thing we saw, of course, was that the big majority of the men had dogs of one kind or description, size, anything that they could have stolen along the way, on ropes, on leashes, on anything. And he smiled and said, here they are, the GIs the world over. They all love dogs. And I said, yes, they certainly love these. And he wanted to know what I meant by that. And I said, well, this is their rations. When they run out of rice and other food, the dogs go into the cook pots.
Commanding General for America is Joseph Stilwell. A soldier's soldier, his mission is to train a Chinese army to strike back. In India, training thousands of Chinese flown back across the hump, Stilwell learns to know their true ability. But he grows bitter at their government, which cannot nourish them. He feels they can attack and win if led by honest officers, insists that Chiang reorganize his army to throw incompetence out. In Chongqing, this pressure irritates the Generalissimo. He knows that victory is guaranteed by efforts of his allies. His thoughts are on the aftermath of victory, the final struggle for power yet to come. A weariness of spirit seeps through his government. Something fades. They wander alien through this anachronistic city. The fronts are far away. America's flying tigers guard the skies. Their background of big city life cuts them from direct involvement with these peasant people. Little luxuries, little pleasures occupy too many minds, too long exhausted by the years of sacrifice. Yet nonetheless, the prestige of Chiang's government grows. Foreign diplomats court his favor, do him honor. In 1943, at Cairo's Wartime Summit Conference, he sits with Roosevelt and Churchill, accepted now as equal of the great, consulted on the strategy of global war, assured of China's freedom, China's greatness in the post-war world. From Yannan's tawny hills, the communists watch all this and brood. Unrecognized by foreign powers, they know their strength is growing. Not foreign aid, but peasant emotions give power. And Mao too is hardening. Like Chiang, he thinks beyond the war to what must follow. 20 years of flight and fighting have toughened him to hardship. But his memory too is scarred. By Chiang, by white men, Russians and Americans alike. His troops swell daily behind enemy lines. His self-assuredness freezes to dogma. He has been right so often when others made mistakes. His truths become, for communists, a holy script. Colonel David Barrett, chief of the American military liaison team in Yan'an, watched all this and recalls,
they emphasized that they had to give the troops political training because the political consciousness of the peasants who made up the Chinese Communist armies was very low. So therefore, they said, we have to give them political training. I told them, I said, in the United States Army, we look with disfavor on giving political training. We think we should devote our whole time to military training. Well, they said that is not the case in our Army because we consider military training and political training as equally important, and one cannot be neglected for the other.
Zhu De agrees with Mao. Power is what comes out of a muzzle of a gun. But ideas, politics, must motivate the man behind the gun, a concept the nationalists only dimly grasp. Theodore White recalls how powerful communist motivation could be.
I went with a group of Chinese nationalist guerrillas who were organizing resistance behind the Japanese lines. And there was a young nationalist lieutenant and 2 horsemen and myself. And we traveled behind the Japanese lines for, I'd say 2 or 3 days. And then the Japanese flushed us. And we